I'm Danny Warshay. I think I recognize most faces here, but it's always good to have new faces. For how many of you is this your first event that the Center for Entrepreneurship is hosting? Great, really happy to have you. We are doing this in conjunction with the Social Innovation Initiative. Happy to have Liz Pollock here, and always happy to be collaborating together with that group. I thought I would take the opportunity to tell you just a little bit about what's going on through the center, especially those of you for whom this is your first time with us, and encourage you to visit our website, which is entrepreneurship.brown.edu, and to be in touch with us at entrepreneurship@brown.edu, and we'll be happy to add you to our weekly mailing list. I think some of you are on that. That may be how you know about today's event, and we have a ton of stuff going on between now and the end of the year, and even well beyond. We're already planning things into the fall. I think you know, but I'll just underscore briefly that our mission is making entrepreneurship an essential part of the Brown experience. And that means that applies to every pocket, every part of the Brown community. And I think we're doing a good job of that. If you look at all the events that we've been hosting since we started last September, they've been very diverse across a very wide footprint. Everything through the curricular side of things. We're hiring new faculty. We conducted a very successful academic research conference that Jen and Liz led last fall called Entrepreneurship at the Intersection of Diversity and Inequality. We're continuing the momentum from that conference by publishing output from the conference, by holding additional colloquia, by supporting research among faculty, by supporting research among graduate students this summer. Outside of the classroom, we're doing all sorts of these kinds of workshops and events, speakers, office hours. We're encouraging students to be involved of all type, undergrads, grads, postdocs, faculty, staff, parents, alumni. And then, as today's event is a good example, we're reaching well out into the community in Rhode Island and even around the world. We've done some events in conjunction with neural researchers in Tel Aviv, in conjunction with neural researchers here, for example. So when I say around the world, I mean around the world. And then the third component of how we're executing that mission is through venture support. And we have grants available, starting with small Explore grants of a few $100s to expand grants of a few $1,000s to, again, in conjunction with the Social Innovation Initiative, the Embark Fellowship, which is many thousands of dollars. And then we're also providing access to mentors through our B-Lab Accelerator that we run over the summer. And then also introductions to other sources of resources and capital. For example, to a group started by one of my former students called Ever True Ventures, which is a group of Brown alumni who are making angel investments into ventures that come through the university, and in particular through our center. So there are a lot of ways in which we're engaging with the Brown community, with all components of the Brown community, and across what I call a whole developmental spectrum, from the, maybe it applies to some of you, from the first time you touch the word entrepreneurship and get any exposure to it, we call that engage, to where you might be inspired to take some action, we call that inspired, and then where you might be a little bit more advanced and be interested in some of the more significant resources that we make available that we call empowerment. And today's event is in that second component that I described of co-curricular activity. We're really proud, as I say, to be collaborating with the Social Innovation Initiative. That's kind of the hallmark of what we're doing. We're trying to collaborate interdisciplinarily across organizations all throughout the Brown campus. I see people who've been at, for example, a public health workshop we did last semester, and others who've been at different ones. So I encourage you to stay in touch with us, make sure you're on our email list, come to any events you want. I promise you'll be well fed, both in terms of your gustatorial interest as well as your intellectual interests. And I'm not going to take a long time to introduce our speaker, Richard Collada, but I do want to highlight the fact that there is such a thing as a Chief Innovation Officer at the state of Rhode Island. That wouldn't have been the case just a couple years ago, and is not the case in many places around this country. It's something that I think all of us can be really proud of in terms of the priority that our state puts on innovation and entrepreneurship. And even the title for today, I love saying public sector entrepreneurs, and I think it resonates with this mission that I described of making entrepreneurship an essential part of the Brown experience, because it applies to people who are doing research, it applies to people who are studying humanities, it applies to people who are starting tech ventures and doing technology research, and it applies to some of you, no doubt, who are interested in the public sector and how you can express that mission of entrepreneurship in the public sector. I'm going to let Richard describe in a little bit more detail what he does and who he is. I'm going to apologize.
Keep going if you want.
Okay. I'm just going to apologize in advance that part of the nature of my job is I have to be in lots of different places at one time. And so I'm going to leave it to Richard to take the introduction from here. You're in for a treat. Richard does great work, and I'm really excited that we're collaborating with him. And I don't want you to take it personally that I have to exit shortly after you get started, but I really appreciate your taking time from what I know is a busy schedule as well to be with us today. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Thanks. I'm glad to be here. I don't know. I came from Curry, so this is all just like a bonus on top of that for me. But I'm glad to be here, and we have already, in the short time that our office has been in existence, have had some really great opportunities to collaborate with the Brown community, including just last weekend the Ocean State Innovates project that we got to be part of, and some other great work that we are doing around computer science, taking computer science to students across the state, which I'll share about in a little bit. But I'm incredibly excited to be back. Just for the 30 seconds on me, I grew up here. I grew up in Kingston. My mom was on the faculty at URI. Grew up here and then left, never really thinking I would have a chance to come back to Rhode Island. I just didn't see, for the work that I do, it didn't seem like it fit here. I've had a chance from a very forward-thinking governor to say, why don't we come and try some things differently in Rhode Island, and I've been really happy to be back in the state doing some of that work. Let me maybe just start, and I want to keep this as much of a conversation as possible here. Our job, my job, the role of what the governor's asked me to do is to think about how do we bring innovation and entrepreneurship to the public sector, right? How do we rethink and redesign government? So when we think of entrepreneurs, the types of things that we think of are really a mindset, right? A creative mindset, and a way of tackling problems and finding new solutions to tough problems that have not been discovered before. We have done a really good job in the country, I believe, and frankly around the world as well, of creating private sector entrepreneurs. And you hear people measure themselves in terms of the, venture capital raise, the rounds that they've closed, if they become profitable, if they've been bought out by a bigger company, right? You hear those terms to try to quantify entrepreneurship. We've done a very good job of that. In fact, in some ways, I think we've overdone that. There's a bit of a bubble on that. What I've been really excited about to see in the last year or so, a couple years, is a real push on what I would sort of call social entrepreneurship, right? It's double bottom line. This is something you start to hear. You see programs like Ashoka taking off. You see programs like the Swearer Center and the great projects here through the Center for Entrepreneurship that are starting to think very carefully about that. What we have not seen yet is enough focus specifically on public sector entrepreneurs. How do you bring entrepreneurs into the into government? And there's such a huge need for it. Before coming to Rhode Island, I worked for the White House. I worked for the Obama administration, and one of my goals was to help tackle some of these tough problems. And I'll give some examples of this. But we did some interesting things. We created something called the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program, where we bring people in from Google and Microsoft and top companies from around the country for a sabbatical. It was like a year. It was like TFA for government, right? Like you do or city year maybe is the better example, right? You do city year, you do like gov year. And we got some incredibly talented people in that were able to help rethink and reshape a lot of what happened in government. And then when they left, which is of course, the beauty of Teach for America, if you're familiar, that when the awesomeness, I think, kicks in after the experience is over, when they go back to whatever their normal job is, but have this understanding of how to connect and follow on what they do back to what's happening in government. Okay, so let me hit pause on that for a second and tell another story. Before I went to work for the Obama administration, I worked for the CIA, and we helped create an innovation team at the CIA. And one of the stories, there's some great stories that come out of that, by the way. And it's awesome because you won't ever know if they're true or not, so I can basically make anything up I want. This one really is true. I'm not making this one up. There was something called Skunk Works. Anybody heard of this? Do you know this story? Do you have any like nerdy intelligence folks? You're like maybe a little bit?
There was like a reference to it in Silicon Valley, the TV show. You know, like
Oh.
a company within a company doing like secret espionage.
Totally, you got it. That's you basically just told the story. Okay, so Skunk Works. What happened was this was Lockheed Martin, which was a contractor of the CIA, and this was at the time before we had the satellite technology that we have today. Right now, if we want, I mean, we could be like reading the stuff that you're writing from through the window, and it is unbelievable the amount of ability to use satellites to get information. Now everybody's like creeped out and they're just closing their books and nobody sees it. But before that was the case, it was very hard to get the intelligence that we needed. And around, certainly in Cold War era and Cuban Missile Crisis time, it was very important for us to know whether to be able to call someone's bluff or whether to, and we had to have pictures. We actually had to have a device going over taking pictures. The problem was the planes that they were using were too slow to do that. So as soon as they get close, they blow them out of the air, which doesn't help if you're trying to get the pictures back that they were taking on the plane. And so they said, we need to be able to create a plane that is so high, can fly so high and so fast, that by the time it shows up on anybody's radar, it's already way past the country they were taking pictures of, which is a pretty amazing feat to think about. And so what they said is Lockheed Martin had this project. They said, we can do this, but we're not going to be able to do it within our current structure. We need to be able to sort of come off to the side a bit here, pull a team away from the normal day-to-day routine that they have, pull them out of their cubicles, pull them out of whatever regulatory framework they were under, whatever the sort of bureaucracy that was crushing the type of innovation that was needed to solve this problem. They needed to have a safe space to work on that. And so they created this thing called Skunk Works. And so long story short, they ended up creating something called the Blackbird SR-71, if you're familiar with that. And this plane, to this day, is the highest flying and fastest plane ever created. And it was created by this team that worked off to the side. By the way, one quick anecdote on that. When I worked for the CIA, we didn't have, they were all in storage in Los Angeles. We didn't have one at Langley. And the director at the time, Michael Hayden, said, we should have one here. Right, we should, and the people who could fly them. You can't just I'm a pilot, by the way, and just a normal, you can't just get in one of those and fly in if you're a pilot. This is very special training. And so there's fewer and fewer pilots available that can still fly them. He said, well, they can still fly it. Let's get one out here. So they flew it from LAX to Dulles in less than an hour, just to give you a sense of what this plane is. Like, it is unbelievable, right? The idea here is that you were able to create this, you were able to get this amount of innovation, this amount of sort of entrepreneurial thinking by having a space off to the side where you're freed from some of the bureaucracy and some of the norms and some of the cultural limitations to do awesome stuff. And so what we're proposing to do, and what the goal of my office as charged by the governor is to be the Skunk Works for public sector entrepreneurship for the country. Can Rhode Island be that place? Can we be the equivalent? And we even talk about, if you look at the size of Lockheed Martin, that's about the size of the Skunk Works team that went off to the side. If you're in an R&D shop, it's usually a small percentage. You go outside and you come up with the great solutions. And so I absolutely believe that Rhode Island is in a great place to position themselves to do that, to be the place where we are both learning and trying and becoming a model for other states that couldn't do this because it would take too darn long, and take advantage of our small size and our great partners and the ability to get everybody in a room if we need to make decisions faster and be able to try out this model and say, what does it look like to have a Skunk Works for public sector entrepreneurship? So that's what we do. That's the Office of Innovation. We have, we're just down a couple blocks down here on Westminster Street is where we work. And Billy Watterson, who was not that long ago sitting in your shoes in this room somewhere, he helps lead a whole bunch of the projects that we're working on. And so we have a great team of people that are coming together to make some of this happen. I want to tell you very quickly the three approaches that we use to tackling tough problems, and then I'll give some examples, and then I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback and comments. Three rules that we have. The first is we believe in rapid prototyping. One of the things that government is really known for, if you think of what are the the hallmarks of government, it's very large, very slow, very long, and usually very ineffective project, especially when you think about in the tech space, not very effective projects that get rolled out. And part of that is because they're built, in this top model here, where you start a year of planning, and then a year of looking for funding, and then a year of like studying, and then a year, and like 4 years later, you finally have something. But this is actually a little bit inaccurate, because at the end, it's like, oh, smiley face. But usually what happens is there's some assumptions that have been made back in year one, where like, well, we want the wheels on the top of the car, and you can like push it down the street, right? And so when you get to year 4, what you build, there is no smiley face on year 4. And but by then we're 4 years and $300 million taxpayer dollars into it, and it's too embarrassing to say, hey, we screwed up, right? That's a problem. We can't, it would be, sort of like, no, this is right. You should just know that you want to push cars down the street, right? Like, what's your problem? We got it right, right? It sets up this weird thing, because we can't say, oh, hey, we didn't really have enough information to start. So one of our approaches is that we have a rule that any project we work on has to have a tangible outcome, has to be in the hands of citizens in 6 months or less. And it doesn't mean that we're not going to build the car, but it means that sometimes we're going to start with a skateboard. And that's one of the hardest things that we do in government, is we say, I love your idea to transform everything in the world all over and fix everything and have floating cars all over Rhode Island, but what's like the one small piece that we could start and know that we can actually do? And that it's just such a foreign concept a lot of times in government. We're like, oh yeah, we could like just do a small pilot of this one thing and then learn from that. And so that's our first rule, so we do everything in rapid prototyping. The second is we don't own any of our projects. You will not see our name on any of the projects that we do. Sometimes we're included on there because our partners are nice and they do that. But our goal is to help change. It's about a culture shift, right? It's not about going off and doing a bunch of cool stuff off in the corner. It's about bringing this shift of entrepreneurship to government more broadly. And so the way that we do that is we made a rule right from the beginning that if we don't have a partner that's a sustaining partner, we don't touch the project. And our partner could be a state agency, it could be a university, it could be we have a variety of partners that are in the private sector in Rhode Island and are working on a tough problem and have some good ways to solve it. And so that's how we approach it. We actually started, in order to start building these future partners, we started a kind of a boot camp for new employees that come in to the state. We didn't have one before, by the way, that you get hired and you just like show up and be like, all right, there, just go do your job. All right, not even a day. So we have a sort of a boot camp for new employees. I have just a very quick piece of that. We do a session there, and I have a little video that we play there that I'll show you that just gives you a sense of what we're trying to do with the culture shift that we're looking for. If that'll play. Go. So that's just one example that we show, and then afterwards we do an activity, and we're like, what are examples when we're sitting around being those people talking about forming the committee, when you can just like do something, and it's that idea of just bias to action, like let's learn by doing it as opposed by studying it. And then the other thing that we created is what we call our Government Innovation League. This is the first state, I believe, in the country to do this. It's based off of Google's 20% time. So we went out and we signed an MOU. We have people from almost every one of our agencies across the state, and they come in, and there is they have an MOU that we signed, so 20% of their time. So 80% of the time they work on their normal job, 20% of their time they come together and work with us in the Office of Innovation, rethinking approaches to tackling tough problems. And we teach them new tools, we partner them with people, we bring people in from around the country that are known for thinking about entrepreneurship and innovation, and help empower them to really tackle tough problems. And then they go and become ambassadors back to their agencies for thinking about how to do things differently, and then another cohort comes in, and each cohort lasts about 9 months. So these are just some of the posters that we have up in our with the cohort. So those are the ways that we try to build our partners. And then the last one, our last rule, is that we use a non-traditional approach. And basically what we're saying is, if you're coming to us because you're gonna just create a law or make policy, you don't need us. That's not what we're trying to say. Are there new approaches? Are there different approaches to getting stuff done? often one of the things I say a lot on the team is that there is, there's the old saying, to a man with a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. And in government, that hammer tends to be regs and policy, right? Like, we have a problem, great, let's make a reg, right? Oh, great, we know exactly what will solve the fact that we have, an opioid addiction. Let's go put new policies out about, right? And by the way, I want to be super clear, especially in light of some of the stuff that's happening in DC nowadays. I am not minimizing the importance of public policy or public regs at all. It is incredibly important. What I'm commenting on is that sometimes we think that's the only tool we have to make an impact. And in fact, it's not. There's hundreds of other tools that we have available that we can use at any point to really improve lives of citizens living in Rhode Island and elsewhere. So what I thought I would do is, I'm just going to share probably 5 or 6, depending on time, of the different tools that we use and give you an example of some of the projects we're working on. And then we can, just open it up for discussion. But by the way, even though I'm running through this kind of quickly, stop me along the way. If you have a question or anything, I get excited about this, so I'm gonna just kind of keep going, but don't raise your hand or throw something at me if you have a question about anything we're talking about. So here we go. First is prizes and challenges. That's one of the tools that I think we can use much more of, and we've been trying to do that in the Office of Innovation. This is an example from the federal level. Every year 1 in 6 Americans become sick from foodborne illness. And in the past, it took the FDA quite a while to be able to look through the process. It took a while to be able to find and detect foodborne illness in leafy greens. And so instead of the traditional approach of changing regs or policies, they said, let's do a challenge. And so they put a prize up. They put up some funding and did a prize for anybody who came up with a better approach to streamline detecting whether there was foodborne illness in leafy greens. And the winning team, by the way, took the time. So it took the FDA 48 hours in the past to do this. And when you're talking about food that is literally the second it's cut is starting to go bad, right? And then it has to sit out, has to get to the stores and all that. 48 hours is a long time. And that was through the most optimized approach they could come up with. They put it up for a prize, and the team that won got the process down to 2 hours. Right? So it's this idea of saying, we don't have to come up with all the answers. We can use prizes and challenges to get better ideas. We're doing one here. This is just a week or so ago. We met with all of the librarians. We have a project called Studio Road. And it's a prize to invent, to design a next generation public library. We feel that libraries are critically important in communities moving forward as more and more interaction will be in a digital space. And I don't mean just applying for jobs and that sort of stuff, but I mean designing and thinking and creating and organizing around, for good causes. And we don't really have places that are designed to help with that. So we believe that libraries will be key to be the digital community hub of the future. We need to see what that looks like. And instead of us regulating it or deciding what it's going to look like, we said we're going to do a prize, and we brought a bunch of the different libraries in, and they have come back to us with some really, really awesome plans. In fact, later today, we're going to be making a decision to award one of the libraries with some funding to be able to build out this model, and then you sort of go from there. But it's this idea that what they came to because of this challenge was way better than anything that we would have come up with, right? Next tool, hackathons. You guys, Brown does hackathons. We know about this. Not a new idea. One of the things that may be a little bit distinct about government and why this is such an important tool is that, do you know what movie that's from, by the way?
Indiana Jones.
Thank you, Indiana Jones, whoever said that. You should all go watch that movie. It's a great movie. Indiana Jones. At the end of Indiana Jones, there's this. I won't give away the movie. There's this thing that they're trying to hide, and the government's like, "We got it. Nobody will ever find it." And they take it and they put it in a box and they bring it into this government warehouse. And it's going to be safe for decades, if not forever, because nobody will ever find it in this big pile of stuff. We have a lot of data. And the data is sort of like that, right? Imagine this is kind of government data. We have a lot of information about a lot of things, but it's not very helpful to citizens if it's boxed up in warehouses, places that can't be used to improve decision making. One of those pieces of data is public transportation, right? Where we know where all our buses are at any point in time. We know when they're going to be there. We have transponders on the buses. We know when they're leaving. We know where they are. But there's no good way to access that data. And so again, the traditional approach would have said, let's go get a government contract, let's go put it out there, let's see who responds to build us an app that probably won't work very well, and we'll be overcharged for it, and then we'll have to keep it maintained, which we're not very good at, right? This cycle. So instead we said, let's just do a hackathon, and we invited a bunch of people from the community together, and bought them pizza and root beer for a couple days. And they built a series of apps for RIPTA, in partnership with RIPTA, to have some tools to help people navigate public transportation in Rhode Island. There is no app at the moment to do that, right? You can like download the PDF of the schedule, but if anybody's tried to, when I first got into this role, I was like, hey, let me try to get around town using public transportation, because that's what we're supposed to do, right? Like being all part of the community. And I'm like, after 10 minutes, I'm like, screw it, give me an Uber. Because it was so hard to figure out where I was going. And so there are ways that we can bring in the community to do that. Third tool, public-private partnerships. Love this one. This is just simply being able to say there are private sector entities that can do stuff way better than the public sector. And there are things that the public sector can do way better than the private sector. And it's pairing up those skills together to do something awesome. One of those examples, one of my favorite ones, is CS4RI. When I joined the governor's team, we were the worst state in the country, arguably among the worst state in the country, for graduating students with computer science out of high school. We had like 22 kids that passed the APCS test after high school for the state, right? Like that's like that would be like a bad number for most high schools, right? And so we really had a problem, and we said we don't want to just kind of catch up a little. We could do that. We want to actually leapfrog. And we want to say, how can we get to the front of the line? And again, can we bring some? This is a great example of this idea of public sector entrepreneurship. How can we rethink our approach? And so we use public-private partnerships, a series of them. We have partnerships with Microsoft. We have partnership with Brown. Anybody's part of the CS program here might know about Bootstrap, which is a program for teaching kids coding. And we, as of last count, we went from we are about 75, I think. 75% of the schools in Rhode Island are now offering computer science. We are on track to be the first state in the country to have computer science offered in every K-12 school, right? And that's because of entrepreneurial thinking in this, and using these new tools to get stuff done and working with these partnerships. Yeah?
How long was that process? So like, when did you start the curriculum development, and when do you think it'll be in all schools?
So it started a year ago, almost to the day. It started last year.
That's when it was really bad, and then
that was when it was launched. We launched it a year ago, and then and again, we just said we don't need to create all this stuff. We tapped into Brown, that has a great program. We tapped into URI, that has a great curriculum. By the way, just to give an example of this, again, I mentioned I used to work for the White House, so I knew folks at NSF, and they really care about this idea of preparing people with coding skills and all that sort of stuff. So I called them and I said, hey, who should we go talk to? Who are the people that really know this? And like, we gave, I can't remember the exact number, I think it was like 5 grants. Like, we gave 5 grants out across the country for people who are doing the best work in building curricula for computer science for K-12 students. 2 of them were universities in Rhode Island. So so you have the worst state in the country in terms of graduating kids with computer science, and 2 of the incredibly competitive NSF grants to design curriculum went to 2 schools in Rhode Island. So you just go, how long has that been going on for? So very quickly we were able to just say, let's just get on the same page here, figure out how to get this done. So that's it. And then we also, this was actually combined this was a bit of a public-private partnership and a challenge, because we also went out to the schools and said, hey, you got to agree to sign up to do this. And we have a page that is a map of all the schools, and they're all color-coded, so you can see which ones are doing it and which ones aren't, and so it's pretty obvious. And on the map, we list the contact information for the principal of the school. So if they're not, if they're bright red because they're not offering computer science yet, we're not the ones holding accountable. We're like, hey, parents, wow, that's interesting. Look, your school's red. Oh, if you hover over, you got the contact information for your principal. Yeah, you might want to call them, right? So we have this ability to sort of encourage them and play leaderboard a little bit to get them up. And by the way, almost all of the high schools have already begun to adopt it. So it's largely just the elementary school. So it's a pretty big deal. Let me see. I'm going to see if I might skip a couple of these. This is one. I'll just give this example really quick. So citizen sourcing is just the idea of trying to very quickly get data from citizens, as opposed to slower, traditional ways that government would go about it. I'll give 2 quick examples. One is City of Boston. We haven't adopted this yet. City of Boston uses something called See-Click-Fix. Some of you may be familiar with. So when you have it, you see a street light that's out, you can just click it on your phone and it alerts them right away. And so instead of having people have to go around and figure out where all the lights are out on the street, they immediately get crowdsourced information about that. They also have an app that uses the accelerometer on your phones, so they can look at the city at any given point in time, and they know exactly where the potholes are because they see everybody's phone right that on the road, and they can go after and fix those potholes. So they don't have to be looking for them; they're citizens sourcing the content. When I worked at the Department of Education, when I worked for the Obama administration, we had a challenge of getting schools connected to broadband. And we knew they were slow, we knew they didn't have good, high quality wireless, but we didn't know how bad it was. We didn't know how much funding they would need, we didn't know what we had to do to fix that problem. And we started by trying to get a contractor to like call the schools and find out whether their internet was working, and we didn't get good data. So finally somebody was like, well, hey, why don't we just create a little speed test thing? We knew where the schools were, so we could map up their location from their IP address to where they were, and just did a social media campaign and said, hey, if you're a student or if you're a teacher or a parent and you're in your school, get on the school network and just test it. Test it in the morning, test it at night, just ping it all times of the day. And so we got parents and teachers and faculty members across the country just pinging their school network for a couple months. All of a sudden, we knew exactly which schools needed more Wi-Fi, and which schools didn't have it, and which schools were doing okay. And because of that, we were able to take that data to Congress, and even in a very difficult budget time, we were able to get $5 billion to help connect all schools to broadband. So those are the kind of approaches that we could use. Let me just share two more, and then I'll pause. The other is this idea of pledges, right? How do we use pledges to get people to act? It turns out that people actually want to do the right thing most of the time. And if you just give them an opportunity to pledge publicly to do it, they will. And so one of the projects that we were working on, we were talking to students about cost of college. As you may have heard and seen if you watch the news around here, this is something that the governor cares deeply about, is how do we lower the cost of college? And she has a plan that's before the legislature right now to talk about even some free college for our state colleges. But we need to do something fast and quickly to help lower the cost of college, especially for some of the students at community college and other places that are working through jobs and trying to pull this off. We went and talked to them. They said, what's the biggest challenge? They said, we actually have some supports for tuition, and we have some things that are going to help us in that regard. But man, we're getting killed by these textbooks. We're spending thousands of dollars for textbooks. Half the time they don't even get opened, by the way. And so we said, well, this is something we can do about it. So we made a pledge. It's a pledge that all of the institutions, including Brown, signed on to voluntarily, that agreed that they would create a concerted effort to transition from commercially licensed textbooks to open licensed textbooks. And so in the institutions that have already done this, and so you may be aware of this, right? There are most textbooks that we sell now, that we buy now, they have a copyright symbol on it, right? It's copyrighted, you pay for the right to use that book. Well, there are thousands and thousands of college textbooks that are almost identical, in fact, some cases higher quality than the commercial licensed ones, that have been created with what's called a Creative Commons license. So it means that you can copy it, you can send it, you can modify it, you can redistribute it. All that stuff that you're normally told not to do, if you copy this, you will go to jail, right? You're allowed to do all of that stuff because there's no limitation on the redistribution of it. And so we simply said, hey, let's start institution by institution to identify the courses where there's a good open licensed textbook and just switch. So we tested this, we did a pilot, because I showed you at the beginning, we rapid prototype. So we did a pilot at Rhode Island College, one biology course, and we saved about $200,000 for the students, just in that one course, switching over to an open license textbook. So we set a goal to save $5 million in 5 years, and that's one of the pledges that we've been working on. There are other pledges. This is one for employers. This is the Fair Chance Pledge, which is a pledge for employers to remove the box that says, have you ever been convicted of a criminal offense, right? It is not the job of employers to enforce the justice system. If somebody has had an issue, they have served their time, they have done what we as a society have decided is the necessary response for whatever they have done, and so continuing to punish them by keeping them from getting a job, which then, by the way, tends to loop them right back into behaviors we wouldn't want anyway, is not the role of employers. And so this is simply a pledge. So will you just pledge to take that stupid box off your dang employment form? And a whole bunch of responsible employers have raised their hands and agreed to do that. So it's a very, very powerful one. Okay, last one. Let me do one more, and then maybe I can. I'll do one more. And there are some others that I can share too later. But this idea of a neutral convener. We often talk about the ability to be sort of like Switzerland in terms of tough issues. If I'm a company and I know that I need to work with other companies and other organizations to solve something, I say, hey, I'm going to invite y'all over and we're going to talk about it. immediately everybody's thoughts like, ah, right, you're either gonna try to sell me something, or you're gonna try to like get some trade secrets out of me because we're competitors. Right? Company can't do that. Government has the unique ability to be this convener. We can call people together and say, we're bringing you all in, we're buying you some food, and we're locking the door, and nobody walks out of here, and you come up with a solution for how we lower homelessness in Rhode Island. And that's a very powerful tool that we use. We actually just did it. We've done it for a number of things. This is one of the ones that actually Billy's leading, is a project on 5G wireless. So if you're familiar on your phones, you have something, you'll see sort of 4G wireless up in the corner. You see that number. It's basically, without getting too nerdy, we're on the 4th generation of wireless technology. That's what we use for our cell phones. And it's about hit the limit of its capacity. And you know that because if you try to download videos, it takes a long time. You know that your bandwidth is metered by the month. You pay if you go over a certain amount. It's very expensive. And so the next generation, the next system of Wi-Fi that is being developed is essentially, it'll be fiber speed internet to your phone. At which point every plan will always be unlimited because there isn't this sort of there's this limited supply of bandwidth that we have. That's being developed now. It's already underway. Our question is, how do we get it deployed in Rhode Island first? Right? We would normally be like 8th, 10th, 20th, 50th on the list of places to deploy it. And so our whole point is, let's bring people. We brought people. We're actually bringing people into the room in just a week or so on this, and from all of our different telco providers, from the Rhode Island, we have broadband that's in the state of Rhode Island and networks, and bring them in and say, what do we have to do this? You're sitting in here, and we're gonna, dang it, sit at this table, and we'll get up and we have a plan for how we bring 5G wireless to Rhode Island first, or at least earlier on the list. So it's a very powerful tool. We also did something similar to that with our housing authority, and brought them together and basically said, there are services that will allow us to provide highly subsidized internet to families that live in, that receive public housing assistance. They don't know about it. And so how do we do it? How do we get them engaged? How do we get them connected? And so that idea of just bringing people together helps. Okay, let me, one more, sorry, I'm gonna do one more. I'm gonna skip a couple of them, I'm gonna do one more. Spotlighting. This is awesome stuff. Okay, so spotlighting. One of the things that we learned when I was at the White House, we said, one of the fastest ways to get people to change their behavior is by recognizing the good behavior. There's a whole psychology around positive behavior intervention that you may have heard of. Anyway, the idea is if you highlight people for good work that they're doing, it actually changes behavior faster than telling them the things they're not doing well. And so we were trying to get some things done at the White House. I think this one was around climate change, and we were trying to recognize companies that were doing good work on climate change. We had no money. So we said, we invented this thing called Champions of Change. And we just found people that were doing great stuff and sent them a letter and said, you have been nominated as a champion of change. And we want to invite you to the White House with other peers that are also co-nominees for Champions of Change. And we're going to sit up here and you're going to get to be able, we'll take a picture and you get to say that you were a White House champion of change. All of a sudden, you have people around the country that are like, how did you get to, right? And so this idea of, it sort of became sexy to be the dude who ran a company that was, being environmentally friendly, just by being able to do that. We did it with a whole variety of other things. We are starting in Rhode Island, and actually in collaboration with Ripple, which is our project here at Brown that you may be aware of, something we're calling the Idea Awards. And these are awards for government entrepreneurs, people that are being entrepreneurial, that are being creative and innovative and finding new approaches. And we're just giving it, we don't have any money for it. We're calling them up at the State House, the governor's gonna shake their hand, we're gonna give them a piece of paper, and we're gonna say, you rock. And we're gonna do our best to turn them into a bunch of rock stars when they go back to their departments. These are people who have never been recognized for coming up with creative solutions. And the idea is that if we can just show that we care about this, that we highlight this great work, it starts to shift the culture and people get more excited about trying new things because we're showing that we actually recognize it and appreciate that work. So, I just threw a ton out there. Let me pause here for a bit and comments, feedback, questions, ask, love to hear your thoughts, would love to hear any questions that you have. I have a bazillion other examples that I will spare you from going through, but if there's an issue area that you're particularly interested, I'm happy to share.